Earth. Now, SpaceX's Starship has completed its first full test flight. Previous missions have ended with the rocket blowing up or disintegrating. So how significant is this achievement now, and what's next for SpaceX?
Yeah, because Starship, the first test, as you said, exploded at 30 kilometers. The second test, 6 months later, reached nearly orbit again, but both the Starship and the booster, the bottom part, separated and broke apart. So now in this fourth mission, they did what they wanted to do: have the Starship, the top and booster, separate, then both come back down and orientate themselves. Because in the future, SpaceX will be landing both Starship and the booster on a landing pad to be reused, just like their Falcon 9 rockets. And so as you're kind of seeing, they were able to reorientate itself like it would in the future landing. Obviously, they did this over the ocean because it was a test. So the fact that everything worked pretty according to plan, great success given the previous tests. And look, they test quickly and they learn from those tests, which is a motto of SpaceX. So now you can imagine they'll be looking for in the next test, probably in a couple months, if not sooner, trying to actually aim for the landing itself. So doing these in increments and then working to not only full orbital, so going around the Earth, because they only do a kind of a half an orbit, and then working up towards actually going into the moon, maybe later this year into next year based on the time frame. So really ramping up the testing now that they're getting the milestones that they want on their tests.
And is that flight expected to be a crewed mission at some point, or will that remain uncrewed?
Yeah, so for the time being, it is going to be uncrewed. And for all test flights, they really need to show everything works according to plan before they could be certified by the FAA to carry those passengers. And in fact, often towards the end, one of the tests they have to do is deliberately crash a capsule almost and test the safety mechanism for ejection and giving away from harm. So that's often the last flight they need before they could do the test flight with humans, which is what Boeing did this week, before it can be approved to enter service. So I think we can look at a crew test. It could probably, at this point, I assume it will be 2025. But that just depends on how fast they can get the next test through before that approval. But knowing SpaceX, they move exceptionally fast, and they have really big, ambitious goals that they want to meet.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, other space news this week: China had landed on the far side of the moon a few days ago. They're now in the process of sending back samples. Is this a world first, and how long will it take for these samples to return back to Earth?
Yeah, China is the only country that has landed on the far side of the moon. Now, the far side, we sometimes call it the dark side, but it does get sunlight. It just always faces away from the Earth. So in order for this mission to happen, they had to build a communication relay system, a satellite that can send and receive data from Earth and communicate with that far side. So China did this a few years ago, but that just left a rover on board. This mission is the first to extract samples from the surface, including rock, and return them back. So only two other countries, the US and Russia, have done this. China has returned samples from the near side, the side that faces us, but definitely a milestone that not even the US and Russia have been able to do by landing on the far side and then leaving its surface. Now, those samples have left with the probe. They left a few days ago. They should be landing in Mongolia around the 25th of this month, and then they'll be studied and disseminated from there. So really big milestones. And this is something that we're seeing from China. They're not only just doing what the US or Russia did, but in some cases surpassing them technologically wise.
And what will they be looking for in those samples specifically?
Yes, the far side of the moon is geologically different. It looks different. The composition's different from that side that faces us. So part of this is learning about the history of the moon at an older phase, before a period where there was lots of meteors bombarding and destroying the surface. Looking at that composition, one of the things that China has made clearly known that they're interested in is this idea that maybe there's helium-3 on the moon. Helium-3, so if you think of helium-4 is the normal helium in your party balloons that you inhale and your voice sounds funny. Helium-3 has one less neutron. Now, this is super important because you can then shove a neutron onto helium-3 and you get a nuclear fusion reaction. And this could be an interesting fuel source for nuclear fusion. And China, in their latest samples that they returned from that near side, made it known they were looking at it. This is one of the things that we'll look for, in addition to some of the scientific questions as well. Again, no one really knows if it's there. It's quite theoretical at this point. But resources on the moon, this is what a lot of countries, including the US's led efforts, are now considering in their future plans.
Yeah, very interesting. We'll have to stay on top of that one. Just finally, some sad news coming out today. A short time ago, we learnt that Apollo 8 astronaut William Anders has died after a plane crash. Now, he was one of the first 3 humans to orbit the moon during NASA's Apollo 8 mission in 1968. And during that voyage, he captured what is now a famous image of the Earth rising over the lunar horizon. Just how significant was that mission and the photo that he took?
Yeah, look, Apollo 8 was, as you said, that first to go around the far side, the side that we can't communicate with. And, there was a non-zero chance. In fact, they estimated maybe even 30% chance that they wouldn't make it back, because the math and physics of orientating the craft, if you don't hit your point right, you don't come around the moon and you don't come home. So, we think a lot about Apollo 9, but missions like Apollo 8, which pretty unanimously in the community is pegged to be the riskiest of all those Apollo missions. You had 3 brave people on it. As you said, William Anders was one of them. And, when him and Jim Lovell and when the crew came around the moon and they started to see this photo, you can hear the communication, because there was a scramble to get cameras of it, because they actually didn't think of taking that. That wasn't part of the mission plan. But when they came around, they were so inspired by that image, that same inspiration that we all get from it as well, that they had to capture it. And luckily for us on Earth and humans, we were able to see this interesting perspective of our home planet, that these people, while braving their lives in a really risky mission, decided, let's take a photo that captures the essence of humanity to share with everyone. The story is amazing, the risk is amazing, and he'll definitely be missed in the community.